Welcome back to Slothbox. This channel is proudly sponsored by Lionpool Security Services and the Excelsior Sporting Club. This is James Luxon and I'm delighted to be joined with Abel Sanchez. Abel, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good. A lot of people will know you, especially this era, as Golovkin's former trainer. But I want to get to know a bit more about Abel Sanchez and how you got into boxing first of all. Can you start there?
Sure. I'm trying to get this off my screen here.
Let me see. Try and get that sorted.
I actually started back in the mid-'70s. I started, one of my employees and I started doing Taekwondo and got introduced to martial arts a little bit. Then we went to, I wanted to kickbox, so I went to an actual gym, an Ed Parker gym in Pasadena, California, and met a guy that was in a boxing gym. Talked to him about going to the boxing gym. This is within a month of me joining a Taekwondo dojo. And once we went to this boxing gym, I fell in love with the sport. And I started training there, sparring, trying to run a business at the same time. I was a building contractor. And it was difficult, but I wanted to train. So I started training in this gym, Ben Lira's gym, and fought some kickboxing fights, fought some boxing fights. And then I had to really stop because it was interfering with my business. I couldn't devote enough time to my business. I was spending so much time in the gym. So I had to slow it down. And then I just started helping in the gym. And so that was in the late '70s, early '80s. I started helping, assisting in the gym with the fighters and training fighters. And Ben Lira took me under his wing and started teaching the ins and outs of what he did and how he did it. And when I probably in 1982 is when I stopped because it was just too hard on my business. I stopped for about 5 years. Then the itch came back. In '86, I phoned a young man that was training with me at the gym, which was now training in San Diego, a young man named Lupe Aquino. We started training together. I started training him. Within 4 fights in '87, we fought for a world title under the Top Rank banner in Bordeaux, France. He won a title. My next fighter was Terry Norris. He won a title. My next fighter was Orlin Norris. He won a title. So I had a great start. The fourth fighter that had won a title, but he wasn't with me at the time because I decided I didn't think his management was taking him the right way, was a young man named Paul Vaden, who 2 fights after I stopped working with him, he won a world title also. So I had a great start to a boxing coach career. Then from that point, I started just training other fighters. I went to work for Don King, got in contact with other fighters that were under his banner. I made a couple champions there. So now fast forward to 2001, let's just say I bought 2000, actually, I bought a bunch of property in Big Bear with the intent of opening up a gym to have Emanuel Steward at the time was up to training with Oscar De La Hoya, in fact. And my intent was to build a gym so that Emanuel could use it. So I bought a bunch of property, and one of the pieces I built a duplex with a 4,000 square foot garage on the first floor and converted that into a private gym. Emanuel eventually stopped working with Oscar, so it stayed vacant for about 6 years. My children were using it as a resort house for vacation, for skiing and stuff like that. And in 2007, my youngest son and I decided to convert it into a gym, which was intended for. And we worked on it for about 2 years, converted it into a gym. The first one to use it was a young man named Jose Navarro, when he fought, I believe he fought Christian Mijares in Vegas in 2009, I believe. 2009, 2010, I started getting other fighters. They knew that I had a gym, so fighters started to come to me, and I really didn't want to get back into it, but I really had no choice. But because in 2008, when the economy failed here in the States and all over the world, I took a break from the construction. So I was spending a lot of time in the gym. So fighters started noticing that and hearing about that. So I started getting Baldomir came to me, Abregu came to me, Laura came to me. So there was 4 or 5 fighters that I was training. Then 2010, I got a call from Golovkin's managers wanted to meet me in Big Bear to talk to me about the possibilities. I guess they were looking for a gym. They were leaving their base in Stuttgart, Germany, to move to the States to further his career. So they visited several gyms. I believe they went to Freddy's and to Roberts and a couple of gyms in Vegas. And then when he met me in Big Bear, he actually fell in love with the fact that it was a lot of a country atmosphere, the trees, the fresh air, and that the gym was going to be he was going to be the main guy in the gym. So we met. We had breakfast. They left. Said this. We'll see you later. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to see him again. 2 months later, he calls me up, or the managers call me up, and he tell me he's arriving at the LAX. If I could pick him up, we started training. He fought his first fight with me in Panama. We won a title. Then from that point on, it was history.
Fantastic. I mean, there's quite a lot there to dissect through. So let's start at the beginning. You mentioned, obviously, you started boxing, you fell in love with it, you caught the boxing bug, like many people do as soon as they enter a boxing gym. What was it about boxing for you that stood out compared to the rest of the combat sports that you take part in?
I've never really been a team sport kind of guy. I feel like you make and break yourself. You do the things you have to do to succeed on your own. And I always felt that team sports, other team members could let down the team, let's just say, and not perform at their best. So I felt that for me, one-on-one sports was the best. I've never really been a fan of a team, let's just say. I'm a fan of individual players like Shaquille O'Neal, Derek Jeter, Peyton Manning, Tiger Woods, just people like that just are great on their own and could be great on their own is what not fantasized, but captivated me in the sport, being one-on-one, and you being the decisive reason why you won or lost was a big factor in me wanting to be in boxing.
What was it about boxing compared to kickboxing and taekwondo that you preferred?
I think boxing is more of an art. Boxing is more of a chess game. Boxing is more of a being able to dissect your opponent, being able to outthink your opponent, being able to, and it's just with your hands, and it's just more of a mind game for me.
In terms of the transition to coaching and training, obviously you was fighting, and then as you mentioned, you went off to work, and then you came back in as a trainer role. In terms of that training, did you still enjoy that chess game, that having to think of a game plan for somebody else rather than for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. What you're doing is you're working on particular things. It's just like construction to me. It was building a foundation with let's just say I hired a young man that was had never worked construction. Is teaching them the fundamentals and in 3 or 4 years they become carpenters, and it's foundation that's important, foundation and fundamentals. So in boxing, it was the same thing. You start out with a guy that doesn't know very much, let's just say, and you try to impart the knowledge that you're learning from your mentor. And let's just say we were in the gym for a couple months, and we take him to another gym to spar with somebody else at his level, and we're trying to make sure our guy does the things that we're trying to learn in the gym and on a basic level. And if he's able to do step 1, step 2, then we'll go up to step 2, step 3, step 4. And that part of it is the building of something, the development of something, as it is in construction also. So that was the fun part for a coach, to see what you're trying to impart on a young man is being actually practiced and perfected and executed in a way that is successful.
And you mentioned as well about when you first started in the training with the professional fighters, you had very, very early success. Lupe's first fight world title, the Norris brothers world titles, Paul Vaden on his way to a world title.
Orland Norris also.
Absolutely, both the Norris brothers. I mean, in terms of that, did you sort of feel a bit of a whirlwind in your early professional coaching career?
No, actually, I've always felt even from a young age that I think if we're lucky enough to find the reason we're put on this earth, uh, you live a blessed life. And I found that I was put on this earth to be some type of teacher. I was able to teach young men to be carpenters and to be contractors, and I've been able to teach young men to be fighters and successful fighters and champions. So I found that I have that. God gave me that gift to be able to impart knowledge that I learned and knowledge that I practice and knowledge that I study and research onto others.
Did you prefer the coaching side of it to the fighting side of it?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Because the smile on somebody's face when you've developed something in them and they win and they're successful, the smile on their face is something that's irreplaceable. They become your children. They become somebody that you're responsible for. And I think that was exciting for me.
You had to take a little break away and go back to your construction business before you came back to coaching and boxing itself. How hard was that for you with something that you love?
It was very difficult, but obviously my family and my business had to take precedent, had to be number one, had to be the most important thing, because I still had to eat, had to live. But when you're a young coach, or even I would say not even a young coach, there's a lot of coaches. I'd say 3% of the coaches in this world, boxing coaches, do it because they love it so much, because they're really not making a living. There's very few fighters that actually make enough for the coach to be able to exist without doing anything else. Most coaches have 1, 2 jobs, 3 jobs to be able to put in their free time into the gyms. It was very difficult, but I knew that I had to do that just because it was important for my family and for my business.
And how pleased were you to be able to go back into boxing again? And do you feel it was fate in your destiny to go back into the sport?
I think it's fate, but I also think that, like I said, when you find the reason why you were put on this earth and you're able to find success at it, it becomes easier, obviously, but it's rewarding. It's very rewarding to do what you love and do successfully.
Now, the gym that you built there, the Summit in Big Bear, California, it's now something that has become very well known. A lot of fighters like to use it for the high altitude training, and it is somewhere a lot of fighters will go to for that reason, and they find massive benefits in using your gym. You mentioned it was initially built originally for the use for Emanuel Steward, for Oscar De La Hoya, you mentioned there. First of all, just tell me about your friendship with Emanuel and how that came about that you was going to build this gym for him.
A lot of us, and there's a lot of young coaches in this business, younger than Emanuel, looked up to him as a mentor, whether we want to admit it or not. A lot of the things he did, a lot of the things he stood for. I remember back in the early '80s watching a video of him working corners, and remember USA Boxing was very popular back then on Tuesday nights. And I remember him working corners, and I'm thinking that that's the kind of coach I want to be. That's the kind of corner I want to work. That's the kind of attitude I want to have in a corner. Everything about him was perfect from my perspective as a coach. And then once I got to know him, I actually won my first world title against one of his fighters. We fought in France against Dwayne Thomas, Eubank. We were able to beat him in France on Channel 2 Sports Spectacular here in the States. And we got to be friends. I stayed at his house several times. We fought several times more. I think that we're maybe either 5-3 or 5-4 as opposing each other. But he was the type of coach, the type of person that could sit down with you and explain to you the ins and outs and in his experiences and what he thought and everything about. He wasn't shy about sharing his knowledge, and I think that's important in our sport for the older coaches to be able to take guys under the wing and even if the guy that you take under your wing doesn't listen to you or doesn't do it your way, it doesn't matter. What happens is that you're imparting your knowledge and your experiences on the younger generation. I think that's very important. So Emmanuel was a very important part of my life in the boxing life.
This is a man who.
Why this is here, right here. When he died, 2 days later, I put this on my logos, also with the KO cancer, because it was that he died from cancer. He was the reason why that ended up on my logos of all my shirts.
He's very clearly still a big part of your life. You mentioned there the logo, and still an inspiration and somebody you aspire to be like in a coaching sense and potentially on a personal level as well. How did it feel for yourself to compete against him and against these fighters when it's somebody that you did look up to so much and somebody you was so friendly with?
It was motivating. Are you kidding me? I'm training a guy to fight uh, who I consider the best coach ever in boxing. We're trying to beat his guy, and if we can beat his guy, are you kidding? It's a big feather in our cap. It wasn't competitive like I wanted to badmouth. I wanted to do anything like that. I just wanted to for Emanuel to tell me after, because he would to tell me after I did a good job, or you had your guy prepared the right way. You know, all those things were important to me to hear it from him.
What was Emmanuel like? I spoke to a lot of people who knew Emmanuel, and I always like to ask them what Emmanuel was like away from boxing, away from the gym. A lot of people say, he loved his cars, he loved his barbecues, but for you, a personal highlight or personal um, meetings with Emmanuel, what were they like?
He was so down to earth. I remember playing a lot of pool in his house in Detroit. Um, but I think with me anyway, for me, the fact that he could sit down and share his knowledge and share his experiences and share everything about him, how he started, how he did it, who he did it with, um, uh, his strengths, his weaknesses. He was not shy about sharing all those things. And for a young coach coming up with aspirations of someday to be mentioned in the same breath as Emanuel was important. I mean, it gave me hope. It gave me hope that if he was able to do it, there's a lot of us that can do it. We just got to put in the work.
Did Emmanuel ever give you any tips or advice that you still use to this day?
Yes, the KISS method.
Explain.
Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. He was so he didn't believe in any of the newfangled ideas. It's just keep it simple. All this nutrition, all this strength and conditioning stuff. He never believed in any of that. Towards the end, of course, he went along with it because that was the mode then, and at that point, it's difficult. But all his fighters at the beginning were all kept it simple. They were trained. They trained hard. They sparred hard. They worked hard in his gyms. So I think that was probably the thing that sticks with me most. I am an old-fashioned trainer like he was. I don't believe in any of that new stuff. I've had a lot of success with the old ways. And I think today we depend too much on magical potions or magical ideas that are going to make you better.
I want to talk about your time with Golovkin. Like I said, that's probably what you're most well known for at this current time with the
Well,
current.
you got to remember too, Terry Norris was #1 pound for pound in the world back in the early '90s. Also, I mean, Terry
Absolutely.
Norris. And it wasn't only Golovkin. Terry Norris was probably, he's in the Hall of Fame now, was probably one of the exciting fighters back then when Mike was in jail and Julio was on Don King's cars. We were all in fact, at one time I mentioned of Terry fighting Julio. So Terry was a very big part of my career too. He's really one of the reasons why I was successful after, I think. But anyway, go ahead and talk about Golovkin. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, absolutely. We will come on to Terry, don't worry. With Golovkin, I'll say in this current climate and fan base, they know you for the Golovkin partnership. And as you mentioned, you met with his management. I'm assuming Tom Loeffler was one of those that you met with.
No. No, Tom Loeffler wasn't involved at the time. Tom Loeffler got involved about 2 fights after I took him over. He had 2 managers from Stuttgart, Germany, the Herman brothers. Max and Oleg were actually the people that we dealt with. Those are the people that I met originally. Tom Loeffler did not become his promoter until probably 2 fights after I started working with him.
Okay. With Golovkin, how difficult was it to get him fights?
It was very difficult, but at the beginning, his managers and his sponsors were the ones that were doing his fights. They were paying for the fights. Once Tom Loeffler got involved, Tom Loeffler's connections with HBO and Tom Loeffler's connections with other promoters were, and his insistence and begging, I guess I shouldn't say begging, but his insistence with HBO. We met with HBO several times trying to push him. We ended up on an HBO card by a fluke, really. It was supposed to be Pirog fighting somebody. Somebody got hurt, and Pirog got hurt. We ended up only on the card because everybody involved had bailed because they got hurt. Golovkin ended up fighting Broxa for next to nothing, but we needed the exposure, and Loeffler was able to maneuver us into position, and we fought, and we won. We won on HBO, and he looked fantastic. So Loeffler had a lot to do with that because of who he was with the Klitschko's. You know?
In this day and age of boxing, social media era, it's a lot of trash talk and it's a lot of selling yourself and marketing yourself as a fighter. Golovkin is somebody who lets his fist do the talking, his in-ring action do the talking. He's not big on trash talk. He's not big on social media. He's not got a big media presence as such. Do you feel that worked well for Golovkin? Did that add to his almost mystique, I suppose?
Well, from the beginning, G would not, didn't like talking to the press, didn't like talking because he's very shy. Not that he didn't like talking, he's just a very shy guy. His English wasn't that good. And a lot of the phrases that are used to describe him are one or two or three words that he says what he means by those phrases. But from the beginning, he would say, "Coach, you talk, you tell him what I want to say. You tell him." So he asked me to be the spokesman, so that he wouldn't have to say too much and be misinterpreted because of his lack of the English language. So I was doing the talking that he wanted me to do. But I think that added to his mystique. That added to the fact that he would say very little, but went in the ring and did it with his fist. And I think he liked that. I think he liked the fact that he didn't really have to say very much.
He's a man who, to me, comes across as a consummate professional, somebody who would do everything by the book, you know, very disciplined at what he does. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, let me say this. From the day he walked into my gym, let's say about a week and a half after, I have this dry erase board on my wall where I schedule the rounds and schedule the work. And I wrote down the numbers 1 through 12. I put Muhammad Ali at the top. I left number 2 vacant. And number 3 was Floyd, Pacquiao, and all the guys after that. And I asked him, I said, if you give me 3 years, I promise you that we are going to be right here, number 2, right below Ali. You're going to be the best middleweight. You're going to be the best fighter in the world. Nobody's going to want to fight you. You're going to have all knockouts. I had already caught him on the mitt, so I knew what I was talking about. I knew what I was talking about because I knew what I had. And he looked at me real cheapishly and he says, "Coach, I'm not going to be there." And I said, "I promise you, if you don't interrupt, if you don't have a suggestions, if you allow me to do my work, I promise you can be right there." And to the day that he stopped working with me, he never questioned, never said no, just did his work like he was supposed to, like I'm the coach and he's the fighter. So that is what made him successful, that he allowed somebody to take charge.
Recently, Chris Eubank Jr. called him out after he beat Liam Smith. And there was a lot of talk, obviously, beforehand, a few years back now, where there was potentially going to fight. A lot of talk about a contract was signed on one end and not the other. In terms of that fight, do you feel that's a fight that would appeal to Golovkin?
You know, he's 40. Well, he's 41 or 42
41.
years old.
41.
Yeah, it's sad that these younger guys are calling him out now. Why didn't they call him out before? Why didn't they step to the table before? But Golovkin's a dangerous fighter, man. The one thing that's not going to leave him is if he hits you. Once he hits you, you may be able to hit him now because he may be slowing down because he's getting up in age. But if he hits you, you're going to stay hit. He's going to punish you. He's going to hurt you. You're not going to knock him out. And once he starts pounding on you, it may not be at the beginning, but once the fight goes into the middle rounds and he starts pounding on you, you're going to be a different fighter after his fight. So be careful what you ask for. He's still a very, very dangerous fighter, in my opinion.
When the fight was originally touted to be happening a few years back, was you working with Golovkin at that time?
You cut out.
Sorry, was you working with Golovkin at the time?
No, you cut out. I didn't.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Perfect. The first time around when there was talk of Chris Eubank fighting Golovkin, was you working with Golovkin at that time?
Yes, I was.
What happened there? There was a lot of talk of Chris lost his pen. He never signed the contract. Golovkin had signed his contract. Can you reveal anything that happened there? What went on? There's
really nothing to reveal. You know, sometimes, a lot of times, fighters talk, like you said about the internet. Fighters talk, and you can talk all you want, but if if the people involved with you, the business of boxing is not doesn't correlate with one fighter and another fighter. Let's just say one fighter's with Showtime and one fighter's with HBO, or one fighter with the manager is not going to fight that manager. So sometimes it's so difficult to put fights together because of the business of boxing, not because the fighters don't want to, but it's the business of boxing. So there was a lot of reasons why that fight didn't come off, but Chris wasn't the only one that was calling Gennady out. How many times did Saunders call Gennady out? While he was WBO champion, but they wouldn't come to the table. They wouldn't. You know, I think I did a press conference with another fighter. I think Carson Jones was fighting Kell Brook at the time in England, and I said, why doesn't Saunders offer Golovkin an X amount of dollars and see if Golovkin takes it? And at least then he can say that Golovkin turned it down. But that never came about because all they do is want to talk to use Golovkin's name at the time, to use Golovkin's name like he's backing out. He doesn't want to fight me. No, come to the table with something. You know, it's easy to talk.
Absolutely. You mentioned when you first spoke with Golovkin in the gym, and you said to him, "Listen, we will get you to that number 2 spot. We will get you as the number 1 middleweight, the best middleweight that's been in boxing." There's a lot of debate between who is the best ever middleweight. Is it Golovkin? Is it Marvin Hagler? In your opinion, if they had fought prime for prime, how would that have gone?
You know, I've always hated to do a prime to prime because those eras are different. Those eras are. Marvin Hagler was a lot smaller than Gennady. Marvin Hagler was great in his era. Golovkin was great in his era. Ray Leonard was great in his era. Monzon was great. You know, everybody has a point in their career where they were great, but the methods of training, the methods of sparring, the methods of equipment, the methods of nutrition, the methods of weight, the losing of weight, and all those things come into consideration. It's difficult to say who would have been the greatest, but in their eras, they were the best. I would have loved to have seen him fight Hagler. Obviously, he couldn't. But I hate to compare like that because I don't think that that's fair to either guy. They were both greats in their era.
What about on basis of stats and achievements? Who do you think had a better career?
Oh, listen, Hagler fought the greats in the 80s. I mean, those 4 guys that were just great in their eras. You know, we didn't have a nucleus that wanted to fight because of the business of boxing. I would have loved to have seen Golovkin, Hopkins, Ward come down to 164, 162 or something like that if he wanted to be involved. You know, all those greats in that era to fight each other as they did in the 80s when Hagler and Duran and Leonard and Benitez and Hearns did that back then. Unfortunately, back then, a loss wasn't a death sentence. It seems like today, if you don't have a 0 on your record, nobody wants to talk to you, which is kind of a shame because I think that once you lose, you become a better fighter. In my opinion, you become a better fighter because you understand the monkey's off your back. You know, you're not pressured anymore. But we didn't have that in Gennady's era. Guys didn't want to fight him, and if they did want to fight him, they'd ask for so much that it was just impossible to make a fight. So they both had fantastic stats. The 23 or 24 knockouts in a row. They weren't all defenses, but 23 or 24 knockouts in a row for Golovkin were great. 20 defenses tied Bernard Hopkins' record, which is another great fighter. So Marvin Hagler fought all the best in his era. So they both had stellar records. Who was better? The fans will be able to tell that.
And so you mentioned there about, these days especially, it is something to protect your own. The mentality seems to be very different to how it was back in the 80s. And obviously you came into professional boxing in the late 80s, early 90s, and you're still in there now. Can you see any differences between the mentalities between when you first started to today?
Well, absolutely. I honestly think that back then they were better fighters. They were better fighters because they weren't rushed. Marvin Hagler didn't have a title fight until when? Nobody wanted to fight him, so he was an experienced fighter. Today, we're getting title fights at 10, 11 fights. I'm not saying these kids are not good, but the opposition is not that good either. I think that they were better technically back then because they schooled more. They were more experienced. They held the titles longer. They were better fights most of the time. I think that today developing them enough. Look at Terrence and Spence the other day. Terrence looked like $1 million. Why? How many fights does he have? I mean, he's actually developed into a great fighter. If they'd have rushed him and fought him for a title at 10, 11 fights, we would not have seen this Terrence that we saw the other day. So I think that is a detriment to the young men that are trying to put their names on that list of greats, you know, so that people remember them later on.
Absolutely. One man we've mentioned already at the start of your successful career was Terry Norris, a man who's already in the Hall of Fame, as you mentioned. What was it like to work with Terry Norris? And at that time, with knowing how good he was, did you sort of foresee the fact he would get into the Hall of Fame and he'd have such success that he did have?
You know, it was very exciting working with Terry because you never knew. His fights were so unpredictable. So unpredictable because he's such a daring fighter. I took him to, I think I had him for 9 defenses, and then we had a falling out with the management and wanted to cut my pay. So I left, but he was so exciting to be in the corner watching him fight was very, very, probably the most exciting of any of the fighters I've ever had, just because he was so unpredictable. So quick, not the greatest puncher, but just so quick that he looked like a big puncher. We had some memorable fights. The Donald Curry fight to me is probably the most memorable because that fight was fought just like I wanted it to be fought. He and I sat down and we discussed how the fight was going to go, how I wanted it to go, and he fought it exactly like I had thought we could beat Donald with and look good.
You mentioned it was very unpredictable, his fights, and it was exciting to watch. But as a trainer, was it also sometimes unbearable to watch at times?
Of course. The only really bad situation that we had was the Julian Jackson fight. But before that fight, we got disqualified a couple of times for Terry knocking somebody down and hitting them while they were down, because I remember him telling me that he never saw their feet. He only saw from the waist up. So he never, in his mind, they weren't down. So the only bad situation I would say would have been the Julian Jackson fight. But if you look at the tape, he followed instructions for the first round and then for the first minute of the second round. And then he did what we talked about not doing, sitting on the ropes against a killer. Julian Jackson's probably the greatest puncher ever in boxing, one-punch knockout artist in boxing ever. And he caught us on the ropes. But yeah, there was moments when you knew you didn't want him to do certain things. But that was Terry. That was the fighter in Terry.
Boxing is full of highs and lows. It's a roller coaster ride. I want to start with the lows. What's your biggest low you've had in your career?
The association with Terry over money being over, and the association with Gennady over money being over. Both guys listened to people that didn't have their best interest at heart, and I think that was the most difficult for me because again, they become children. You spend more time with them than you do with your own family, so they become your children. So I think that was heartbreaking for the association to be over after the rise and the heartache of fighting for nothing and then fighting for something. That was difficult.
What's your biggest high from your career?
The smiles on the faces of my fighters when they're successful. I've had a close to 90% average, a winning average in my career, and close to a little over 80% knockout average in my career. And I think that watching them successful and watching them smile means that we accomplished something. I think that was the most exciting part for me. If you notice, in most of my fights, I'm over to the side. I'm never behind my fighter because it's their time. It's their moment, and when we're successful with their moment, that's very rewarding for me. It's like my children, like I said.
Looking back on your career, is there anything that you would change or do differently?
Yes. After we won, we were successful at the beginning. I think that I fell into the trap of trying to please management, trying to please managers and doing what managers wanted when we knew it shouldn't be that way, because we're the ones in the gym. We're the ones that know. Coaches are the ones that know our pluses and minuses. Managers are looking at dollar bills. We're looking at hopefully longevity in our careers, in the fighters' careers. So yeah, I think that I would have changed, not being so um, quick to agree with methods. And let's just say some managers, I won't mention their names, managers, oh, we should be doing ballet dancing because I think it's good for their feet, because Jerry Rice did it in football, or we should be doing, different things that didn't apply to boxing. I'm an old-fashioned coach. I train fighters just like they used to train them in the old days. Where it's boxing. It's not dancing. It's not karate. It's boxing. So we teach them like the old fighters used to work out on a heavy bag. I think the mitts are probably one of the worst. How can I say it? The worst teaching methods ever. Why? Because they're not using them to teach. They're using them to showcase a coach, how fast his hands are and all the fancy moves that he does. And if you look at some of the mitt work on YouTube and some of the videos, none of that stuff ever gets used in a fight. In a fight, we have a 1, 2, 3-point combination, and boom, the fight's over, or they reposition for another combination. So throwing 20 punches in a row in the mitts is maybe it's good conditioning for their arms. I don't know. But to me, that's one of the things that has been detrimental to our sport.
And the final question from me today, Abel, you've achieved so much success through your career so far. What is left for you? What is there any more you want to achieve? Anything else that you've got goals?
No, actually, I sold my gym in Big Bear. I don't know if you're aware of that. I sold my gym in Big Bear last year, and I've retired. I've been asked by several fighters, several big name fighters, to come back and advise and come back and assist in coaching and use some of my methods. I have a young man right now from France who was with me from 12th or 14th fight. He's 27-0. His name is Arsene Goulamirian, who is the cruiserweight champion WBA, who I may be helping in the near future prepare for his next fight. But really, there's nothing. There's nothing really that I want to accomplish. I think I've accomplished what I was supposed to accomplish. But if I can help, I'm more than willing.
Fantastic. Well, Abel, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
It was nice talking to you. Thank you very much.
No problems at all.